Today, we're turning our attention to a case that, well, it really stands alone. It is the singular benchmark for human endurance in a maritime survival scenario.
It truly is. There's nothing else in the recorded data that even comes close.
The timeline begins on November 17th, 2012. The location is the fishing village of Costa Azul near Pijipan off the coast of Chiapas, Mexico.
Right, a very typical departure point for these kinds of fishing expeditions.
And on that date, a small fiberglass boat left the shore with 2 men on board. It failed to return as scheduled.
The primary subject, the man who survived, is José Salvador Alvarenga. He's a Salvadoran national who had been living and working in Mexico for, I believe, over a decade at that point.
And the second individual?
The second was a much younger and, critically, a much less experienced crewmate named Ezequiel Córdoba.
What followed their departure was a drift across the Pacific Ocean that, frankly, it defied all existing survival models. It lasted a total of 438 days.
438. It's a number that's difficult to even process in this context.
Our objective here is to construct a factual, almost a forensic analysis of this event. We plan to examine the logistics of the drift, the physiological mechanisms that allowed Alvarenga to sustain life for 14 months, and the verified timeline of his journey.
And we'll look at his current status today as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's a key part of the story.
This case is, from a scientific perspective, a complete statistical anomaly. When we analyze maritime survival records, we are typically looking at durations of days, maybe weeks.
Weeks would be considered extraordinary.
Absolutely. Even those famous historical examples, the ones people read about, they usually involve larger crews or much bigger vessels that offer some degree of shelter or some initial supplies.
So what makes Alvarenga's case so different?
It's unique because it just shatters the boundaries of what we understood about human metabolic adaptation and psychological resilience, all of this in a completely solitary pelagic environment.
And we should be clear, we are not discussing a myth or a piece of folklore.
No, not at all. We are looking at a biological and logistical reality that, quite frankly, should have resulted in death within the first 90 days. That's what the models would predict.
And the data from this event, it had real-world applications.
Invaluable. Specifically regarding diet, hydration, and the drift patterns in the Pacific equatorial current. The information gleaned from his survival has been studied by oceanographers and physiologists alike. It's a one-of-a-kind data set.
Before we begin the chronological reconstruction of the drift itself, I think it's relevant to establish the current context. As we're recording this in early 2026, the story hasn't really ended. It's evolved.
It has.
So what is the status of José Salvador Alvarenga today?
And that's a critical point of framing for this entire discussion. As of this month, Alvarenga resides in a town called San Francisco Menendez. For years after his rescue, the narrative around him was defined by the trauma of the event.
The psychological aftermath.
Yes, specifically a debilitating hydrophobia, a fear of water, which is, perfectly understandable.
Of course.
However, verified reports now indicate a really significant shift. He is officially on the roster to participate in the ISA World Longboard Surfing Championship.
A surfing championship.
A world championship, yes. It's scheduled to take place this coming April in Surf City.
That is a remarkable development.
It's more than remarkable. We're seeing a subject who, immediately following his rescue in 2014, couldn't even look at the ocean without experiencing panic attacks. He's now preparing to enter a competitive maritime environment, voluntarily.
It suggests a very complex recovery.
It suggests a trajectory of psychological recovery that is as extreme as the survival event itself. You could say he's moved from being a victim of the ocean to a competitor within it, on his own terms.
Let's return to the starting point then to understand the variables that were in play. Who was José Salvador Alvarenga before November 2012?
Right, so he was born circa 1975 in Garita Palmera, Huachapan, El Salvador. He came from, let's say, a working-class background.
And his family?
His father, José Ricardo Orellana, owned a flour mill and a store. So Alvarenga was raised with a certain degree of industriousness. He wasn't a stranger to hard work. He has one daughter.
And he left El Salvador for Mexico.
Yes, he migrated in 2002. By the time of the event in 2012, he had been working as a professional fisherman for roughly 10 years.
And this decade of experience, this is the first critical variable in his survival.
The first and perhaps the most important. We have to understand, he was not a recreational boater. He wasn't a tourist who got lost.
He was a professional.
He's a professional engaged in deep-sea fishing, specifically targeting sharks and marlins. And this type of work requires a very specific, very hardened skill set.
Can you elaborate on that? What kind of skills?
It involves handling heavy monofilament lines with your bare hands, for one, hauling in large, aggressive predators, and crucially, gutting and processing marine life quickly and efficiently, all while on a small rocking boat.
Skills that would become essential.
They would later become his only means of subsistence. Think about it. He had likely spent thousands of hours on the open water. This desensitized him to the very environment that would eventually trap him. He understood its rhythms, its dangers, and its resources in a way an ordinary person simply would not.
Let's analyze the vessel and the mission plan for that day, for November 17th, 2012. What exactly were they sailing in?
The vessel was a 23-foot, or roughly 7-meter, fiberglass skiff. As I mentioned, in the region, this is often called a lancha.
It's vital to visualize this correctly to understand the exposure involved?
Absolutely. This is not a ship. It is an open shell. It was described as topless.
Meaning no cabin.
No cabin, no roof, absolutely no protection from the sun, the rain, or the wind. It was equipped with a single outboard motor, likely a standard 75 or 85 horsepower commercial engine. Nothing special.
What about its cargo or its internal layout?
In terms of cargo space, the boat was dominated by a huge refrigerator-sized icebox. This box was roughly 5 feet long and maybe 4 feet high. It was intended to store the sharks and marlins they hoped to catch.
And other than that?
Other than that, the boat is essentially a flat, open platform. There's no below-decks area. There's no sleeping quarter. You are basically sitting on a fiberglass bench, completely exposed to the elements, 247.
The mission itself was scheduled for a specific duration.
Correct. The plan was for a 30-hour shift. That was it.
Just over a day.
Exactly. They intended to go out deep, maybe 50 to 75 miles offshore, drop their long lines, wait, haul in the catch, and then return. It was a commercial run, a high-intensity work shift, not some kind of leisurely exploration.
And their supplies would have reflected that short duration.
Precisely. They carried supplies commensurate with a 30-hour trip, just enough gasoline for the return journey, a few gallons of drinking water, and some basic food for about a day and a half. Nothing more.
And then the crew composition changed right before they left. This seems like a pivotal factor in the dynamic that developed on the boat.
It was. You could call it the first operational failure, in a sense. Alvarenga's usual fishing mate, his regular partner, was unable to join the expedition at the very last minute.
So he had to find a replacement.
He did. He recruited Ezequiel Cordoba, who was a 24-year-old local. But it's a matter of record that they were essentially strangers.
They didn't know each other.
Alvarenga didn't even know Cordoba's surname at the time of departure. He only knew him by a nickname. This wasn't a team with a long history of working together.
And there was a significant disparity in their experience levels.
A huge disparity. While Alvarenga was this hardened veteran of the deep currents, Cordoba was described as inexperienced, at least in this specific type of deep water shark fishing. His experience was closer to the shore.
And this difference?
This disparity, one man with a decade of physical and mental hardening and one novice, it would become the defining fracture line in their psychological response to the crisis that was about to unfold.
Shortly after leaving Costa Azul, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Walk us through the sequence of these operational failures.
A significant storm system, what's known as a norte, impacted the area very shortly after they embarked. And we need to be clear, this was not a localized squall.
This was a major weather event.
It was. The storm system persisted with high intensity for 5 straight days. The immediate physical consequence was the complete loss of control. The boat was blown far off its intended course.
And motor.
The violence of the waves just overwhelmed the single outboard motor. Eventually, it failed. It just died. We also have to consider the electronics.
Right. In an open skiff, everything is exposed.
Everything is exposed to saltwater spray. So the portable electronics, things like the GPS and the radio, they were soaked. They shorted out. Yeah. At this point, you have 2 men sitting in a boat that is taking on water with no propulsion and with failing navigation systems.
Now, they had been successful in their initial fishing. They had caught nearly 1,100 pounds of fish. But they made a decision regarding this cargo.
They did. And this was the critical decision point for the vessel's immediate stability.
1,100 pounds?
Yeah.
That's 500 kilograms.
Yes. That is a massive amount of dead weight for a 23-foot skiff, especially in high seas. The boat would have been riding dangerously low in the water.
Reducing its freeboard.
Exactly. The freeboard is the distance from the waterline to the edge of the boat. In a storm, low freeboard means every single wave threatens to swamp and capsize the vessel. It's a recipe for disaster.
So they had to make a choice.
To maintain buoyancy, they have any chance of maneuvering, Alvarenga and Cordoba were forced to dump the entire catch overboard.
All of it.
All 500 kilograms. They also dumped their fishing gear to lighten the load even more. And from a nautical perspective, it was a sound decision. It was the correct thing to do. It prevented them from immediately capsizing and drowning.
But it came at a catastrophic cost.
A catastrophic long-term cost. It removed their primary source of potential nutrition and, just as importantly, the tools they would need to acquire more food later on. They traded long-term survival resources for immediate stability.
There was one attempt at communication with the shore before everything failed.
There was one single desperate contact. Before the battery died completely, Alvarenga managed to use their two-way radio to call his boss on the mainland.
What was he able to communicate?
He reported their position, but only broadly. He just requested assistance. But the battery on the unit failed immediately after this transmission.
And this is a common point of failure in these scenarios.
Extremely common. Saltwater corrosion or just simple power depletion cuts the lifeline. So that was it, that single call. And after that, they were left with absolutely zero communication capability.
Let's just list the failures. No motor.
No motor. They had no sails to harness the wind. They had no oars to row against the current. No anchor deep enough to hold them in place. They didn't even have running lights to signal passing ships at night.
So they were, for all intents and purposes, a piece of invisible flotsam drifting in the open ocean.
That is the perfect description. A ghost on the water.
A search operation was launched on the mainland. Why did that fail?
Their employer did organize a search party. They used a small plane and some boats. However, the conditions were impossible. The visibility was practically zero because of the ongoing storm and then the heavy fog that lingered after the winds died down.
So the search was called off.
It was abandoned after just 2 days. And, you have to look at the geometry of this. The 23-foot skiff, probably painted white or blue, in a vast ocean of white-capped waves. It's functionally invisible from the air unless a plane is directly overhead at a very low altitude.
And without a signal to track.
Without a transponder signal, without a radar reflector, or even a defined search area to focus on, finding that boat is statistically improbable. The ocean is just too vast. Once they drifted beyond the immediate coastal shelf, they vanished from the search grid entirely.
Let's move into the forensic analysis of the survival period itself. This is the core of the anomaly. For 438 days, Alvarenga had no provisions. How does the human body even begin to maintain caloric intake in that environment?
This required a complete physiological and behavioral regression. He had to revert to a hunter-gatherer state, but one specifically adapted to a pelagic or open ocean environment.
Entirely sourced from the immediate surroundings.
Entirely. The diet consisted of protein and fat, sourced directly from the water around him and the air above him. There were absolutely no carbohydrates. He was catching fish, turtles, jellyfish, and seabirds.
And it's noted he caught these with his bare hands.
Yes, and this is where his decade of experience becomes the critical survival mechanism. He wasn't just lucky. He understood the behavior of marine life.
For instance?
Well, he knew that sea turtles would often drift near the surface to bask in the sun. He knew how to approach them, how to grapple them without getting bitten. He learned that seabirds would eventually land on the boat to rest, seeing it as a sort of floating island.
A stable platform in the middle of the ocean.
Exactly. And he developed the incredible patience to just wait for them to settle before grabbing them. These are not things an amateur would know or be able to do.
The consumption of jellyfish is particularly interesting. It sounds desperate.
It is a measure of desperation, but it's also a measure of opportunity. Jellyfish are largely water. They have very low nutritional density, but they are available. They're plentiful. You would just scoop them out of the water.
But the primary staples were the turtles and the birds.
Yes, those were the cornerstones of his diet. The birds provided not just meat, but their bones could be chewed for marrow. The turtles provided larger quantities of meat and, crucially, fat.
And he was consuming everything raw.
Everything, which is a key point we'll come back to regarding vitamins. But from a purely caloric standpoint, he was entering a state of ketosis, where his body was running entirely on animal fats and proteins.
Hydration is the more immediate killer in any survival situation. Humans cannot survive on seawater. So how did he manage fluid intake?
This is the most critical variable in the entire equation. You're right, the human kidney cannot process the salinity of seawater. Drinking it just accelerates dehydration and leads to renal failure and death within a matter of days.
So his primary
Rainwater. His primary source was rainwater. He utilized the empty plastic hull of the boat and any containers he could find or scavenge to collect water during squalls.
But the Pacific isn't always rainy.
No, his drift took him through zones of extreme aridity, where it might not rain for weeks at a time. And during these dry intervals, he resorted to two very desperate measures.
The first being turtle blood.
First, he drank the blood of the turtles he caught. Turtle blood has a specific solute load that is lower than seawater. Now, it is not fresh water in the traditional sense, but it is less saline than the ocean, and it contains nutrients. It can provide temporary hydration and keep the organs functioning. It buys you time.
And the second measure, for the most severe droughts.
During the most severe droughts, when even turtles were scarce, he consumed his own urine.
This is a controversial topic in survival manuals.
It is. In a short-term emergency, urine is mostly sterile and mostly water. However, as your body becomes more dehydrated, the urine becomes more and more concentrated with waste products like urea and salts. Recirculating that through your body puts immense strain on the kidneys.
So it's a measure of last resort.
The absolute last resort. It carries its own toxicity risks over time. Alvarenga likely used it only to bridge the gap between rainfalls. He could not have survived on urine alone for any extended period.
You also mentioned scavenging.
Yes. The Pacific Ocean, unfortunately, contains a significant amount of floating debris. He salvaged plastic refuse, food waste he found floating in the water, things like plastic bottles that might have a few dregs of soda or water left in them. Every drop counted.
There was significant skepticism after his rescue regarding his physical health, specifically the lack of scurvy. A diet of only meat for 14 months typically leads to a severe vitamin C deficiency. This was the scourge of historical sailors.
And the skepticism was understandable, but it was based on a misunderstanding of nutrition, specifically regarding raw versus cooked meat.
Explain that.
Scurvy is indeed caused by a lack of vitamin C, which is essential for collagen synthesis in the body. Without it, your connective tissues break down. Old wounds open up, your gums bleed, your teeth fall out. The body essentially falls apart.
But Alvarenga showed no signs of this.
None. And the reason, as explained by physiologists like Claude Piantadosi of Duke University who reviewed the case, lies in the raw diet. Fresh meat, and particularly organ meat from birds and turtles, contains small amounts of vitamin C. The liver and the eyes are surprisingly rich sources.
The critical factor is heat.
The critical factor is heat. Cooking meat destroys the vitamin C content. This is why historical sailors got scurvy. They ate preserved, salted, or cooked meats, which had zero vitamin C. Because Alvarenga had no matches, no propane, no way to make a fire, he was forced to consume everything raw.
So his lack of technology saved him.
Inadvertently, yes. His inability to cook is what preserved the trace amounts of vitamin C present in the organs of the animals he ate. Now, he wasn't getting the recommended daily allowance, not by a long shot, but he was getting just enough to prevent the clinical onset of scurvy.
We must address the fate of Ezequiel Cordoba. The two men were in the same boat, facing the same conditions, yet their outcomes were diametrically opposed.
Cordoba did not possess the same physical or psychological constitution as Alvarenga, nor, it seems, the same digestive resilience.
His decline began about 4 months in.
Yes. Approximately 4 months into the voyage, his condition began to deteriorate very rapidly. The report indicates that he became ill from the raw food diet. This isn't uncommon. Your gut biome needs time to adapt to such a drastic shift, and raw marine life can carry bacteria and parasites that his body couldn't handle.
So he was physically ill.
He began to vomit, which only accelerated his dehydration. But the primary cause of his decline appears to have been psychological.
But he lost hope.
He lost hope. He succumbed to a phenomenon known in survival psychology as psychogenic death, or more colloquially, give-up-itis.
This is a recognized physiological state.
It is a real physiological state where the will to survive is lost. Dopamine levels crash, the prefrontal cortex activity changes, and the body initiates a shutdown sequence. He eventually refused to eat. He refused the raw birds. He refused the turtle blood.
Alvarenga tried to intervene.
He tried to force-feed him, but Cordoba had mentally checked out. He died of starvation and dehydration, which were self-induced by this refusal, roughly 4 months into the drift.
Following the death, Alvarenga faced what we might call the corpse dilemma. This period seems to mark the deepest psychological trough of the entire journey for him.
It's a period of extreme trauma and what looks like cognitive fracturing. It's almost unimaginable.
Yeah.
Alvarenga had made a promise to Cordoba while the younger man was dying.
A promise not to eat his body.
Yes. He promised he would not eat his corpse. And this is a very significant detail, especially regarding the later legal accusations. It shows that even in this extreme state, Alvarenga was holding on to a core social taboo.
And he kept the body with him.
For 6 days following the death, Alvarenga kept Cordoba's body on the boat. He didn't immediately dispose of it. This indicates a kind of dissociative break, a defense mechanism against the absolute crushing isolation he now faced.
He began talking to the corpse.
He did. He engaged in full conversations with it. He would ask Cordoba how he felt. He would answer for him. He was, in effect, hallucinating a companion to fight off the madness of solitude.
What prompted him to finally dispose of the body?
He had a moment of clarity. He recognized that he was sliding into insanity. The realization that he was having these detailed conversations with a decaying body was a jolt. He understood that to preserve his own sanity, what was left of it, he had to remove the physical presence of death from his immediate reality.
So on the 6th day...
On the 6th day, he stripped the clothes from the body. He kept them for protection against the sun and cold, and he pushed the body overboard. This act was likely the hardest psychological hurdle of the entire 14 months. It was the moment he was forced to accept his total, absolute solitude.
Did Alvarenga consider ending his own life after this event?
He did. The isolation following Cordoba's disposal was crushing. He has stated he contemplated suicide for 4 straight days.
What stopped him?
He was alone in the Pacific, no reference points, no horizon other than water, and no probable chance of rescue. He stated later that his Christian faith was the sole restraint that prevented him from acting on these suicidal ideations.
So it was a religious framework.
Yes. He said he feared the spiritual consequences of suicide more than the physical pain of continuing to starve. This religious framework provided a mental structure that, in a way, replaced the social structure that he had lost. It gave him a reason to continue.
Let's move to the oceanography of the drift. Without a calendar or a working watch, how did Alvarenga track the passage of time?
He relied on the most ancient and reliable method available to anyone on Earth, the lunar cycle. He tracked the phases of the moon to calculate the passing of months.
He counted the full moon?
Counted 15 lunar cycles. This actually led to some initial confusion upon his rescue, because 15 lunar cycles doesn't perfectly align with the Gregorian calendar months in a way that's immediately intuitive. It led to early conflicting reports of his time at sea being 16 months, or 13, or 14, but the method itself was sound.
And it shows a certain cognitive discipline.
It does. It shows he wasn't just drifting in a daze. He was actively observing, recording, and making sense of his reality. He also reported seeing transoceanic container ships on occasion.
Which would be consistent with the shipping lanes.
Very consistent. But again, without flares, without a radio, a low-profile fiberglass skiff is completely invisible to the bridge of a massive cargo vessel hundreds of feet in the air. He would wave, he would shout, but they would just pass by, completely unaware of his existence.
After his rescue, oceanographic modeling was conducted to verify his route. This was crucial for confirming his story against the many skeptics.
Yes, the scientific verification was incredibly robust and necessary. A researcher named Eric Van Sabeel at the University of New South Wales and other researchers from the University of Hawaii conducted very detailed drift modeling.
This wasn't just a guess.
Not at all. They input the specific coordinates of his departure from Chiapas, and then they analyzed the actual wind and current data for that specific 14-month window, from late 2012 to early 2014.
And what did the models show?
The models showed that a passive drift, meaning a vessel moving solely by the force of the equatorial current and the prevailing trade winds, would indeed travel from the Mexican coast to the vicinity of the Marshall Islands.
And the timeline matched up.
The timeline generated by the models was approximately 18 months for a standard drift. But a 13 to 14-month transit, like Alvarenga's, was considered well within the realm of scientific plausibility, depending on specific wind anomalies and the lighter weight of the skiff after they dumped the catch.
And the distance.
The total distance covered was calculated to be somewhere between 5,500 and 6,700 miles. That's 8,900 to 10,800 kilometers. The math, the oceanography, it all backed up his story.
The journey finally ended on January 30th, 2014. Describe the moment of landfall.
On that date, after 438 days, Alvarenga spotted land. He saw a tiny islet. It was Tile Islet, which is part of the Ebon Atoll in the Marshall Islands.
And it's crucial to understand how lucky that was.
Incredibly so. If he had missed this one small atoll, he might have drifted for another 1,000 miles before hitting the next island chain. Or, more likely, he would have simply vanished into the vastness of the Western Pacific. The boat itself was likely structurally failing by that point. Barnacles would have weighted down, the fiberglass would be delaminating.
So he abandoned the boat.
He abandoned the boat near the reef and swam the final distance to shore. He was discovered there by two locals, Emmy Lebukmedo and Russell Lickidrick.
What was his condition at that moment of discovery?
He was naked. He was clutching a knife, and he was shouting in Spanish, which of course they didn't understand. This behavior is entirely consistent with the psychological shock of re-entry into the human world. He was, in the literal sense of the word, feral. He'd been removed from civilization for over a year.
He was taken for medical assessment.
Yes, taken to a hospital in Mashiro. The medical findings there were very specific and very telling. His vital signs were generally good, which surprised many people. But he suffered from extremely low blood pressure.
And physically?
Physically, his ankles were severely swollen, a condition known as edema. He had significant difficulty walking, not just from muscle weakness, but because he hadn't actually stood up and walked in 14 months. His muscles had atrophied. He was anemic. And furthermore, doctors suspected the presence of liver parasites, a direct biological consequence of his long-term diet of raw seabirds and turtles.
There was immediate skepticism, though, regarding his appearance.
There was. I call this the Hollywood effect. The public and some officials, they expected to see a skeletal figure, someone who looked like historical depictions of famine or concentration camp survivors. Alvarenga did not look emaciated enough to the lay observer.
He had a beard and long hair, but his face looked somewhat full.
Exactly. But this interpretation completely ignores the medical reality of edema. Severe protein deficiency and electrolyte imbalance cause the body to retain fluid in its tissues. So the swelling of the joints, the puffiness of the face, it can mask the underlying muscle loss. He wasn't healthy. He was pathologically bloated. He was retaining fluid. It's a common symptom of advanced starvation that is often counterintuitive to the non-medical eye.
How was his identity and his story corroborated officially?
The chain of evidence began with the Mexican records. A rescue official named Jamie Mariquin confirmed that a boat had, in fact, been reported missing from the Chiapas area on November 17, 2012.
But there was a discrepancy in the initial paperwork.
Yes, a small one that caused some brief confusion. The report listed the fishermen as Cirilo Vargas and Ezequiel Cordova.
And how's that name discrepancy resolved?
Alvarenga's parents in El Salvador were contacted by journalists. They confirmed that Cirilo was a family nickname for their son, José Salvador. The physical description and the age in the report matched him perfectly. And the identity of the companion, Ezequiel, also matched the missing persons report.
There was also a polygraph test.
Yes. To further verify his account and address the growing international scrutiny, in April of 2014, Alvarenga submitted to a polygraph test regarding the events in the voyage. His lawyer later confirmed that he passed this examination.
So all the pieces fit.
The timeline, the drift models, the missing persons report, the physical evidence of his medical condition, and the polygraph, they all aligned.
Following his return to El Salvador in February 2014, the story took a legal turn.
It did. Alvarenga collaborated with the journalist Jonathan Franklin to produce a book. It was titled 438 Days, an extraordinary true story of survival at sea, and it was published in 2015. It documented the entire ordeal in great detail.
And this book prompted a lawsuit.
Shortly after the publication, yes. The family of Ezequiel Cordova filed a lawsuit against Alvarenga, seeking $1 million in damages.
What was the legal basis of this lawsuit?
The accusation was cannibalism. The family alleged that Alvarenga had not just survived on turtles and birds, but that he had eaten Cordova to sustain himself.
This is a common suspicion in these kinds of stories.
A very common one, especially when there's a sole survivor. Alvarenga's defense was consistent from day one. He vehemently denied the claim, reiterating the promise he had made to the dying young man.
And from an evidentiary standpoint?
From an evidentiary standpoint, there was nothing to support the claim. The boat was recovered, but it contained no forensic evidence, no bone fragments, no tool marks on the boat that would implicate him in such an act. Alvarenga's testimony regarding the disposal of the body remained perfectly consistent from the moment of his rescue.
So the claim lacked proof.
Without a body to examine, and with the consistency of Alvarenga's account, the claim lacked the necessary burden of proof and ultimately went nowhere.
Which brings the timeline to the present, February 2026.
And Alvarenga's life has stabilized in San Francisco Menendez. But the update regarding the ISI World Longboard Surfing Championship in April is, to me, the most telling indicator of his current state.
The psychological magnitude of it.
Exactly. We have to appreciate what that means. For a man who developed a fear of water so severe he could not even be near the ocean in 2014, a man who was held captive by the Pacific for 438 days, to now be competing in a surfing event. It suggests a profound integration of his trauma.
A reclaiming of his relationship with the sea.
That's a good way to put it. He has not just survived the ocean, he has returned to it, but in a controlled environment. He has rewritten his relationship with the water from one of victimhood to one of, perhaps, mastery.
We have outlined the 438 days from November 2012 to January 2014. We have verified the timeline through the official records and the oceanographic modeling.
Precisely. The Alvarenga case confirms that with a very specific knowledge of marine biology and extreme psychological resilience, the human body can sustain itself on a pelagic diet for over a year. It's a singular data point in the entire history of survival. It teaches us that the limits of human endurance are far, far beyond what we typically assume.
Thanks for listening.